Welcome to the Didi and Lital Show. Advice, thoughts, and stories from a married couple on cybersecurity, technology, and life in general. Now here are your hosts, Didi and Lital.
Hello and welcome to the Didi and Lital Show. Hi Didi, how's it going?
Going awesome. You know, I like morning shows so much, I forgot my sunglasses. And now I will have 2 episodes of me squinting again.
It's fine. It's really fine. It's much better without the glasses. And it's, it's pretty dark outside.
It's pretty dark outside.
Even though it's a morning.
It's a morning.
It's raining. We have a guest today.
We have a guest today.
Hello, Aaron. How's it going?
Hello, it's wonderful to be with you both. You're lucky you wear sunglasses. I live in Seattle and it is dark most of the time.
Right.
Typically not this like one beautiful month we get, but a lot of the year. So you're lucky to live in a sunny place where you even carry sunglasses.
Yes.
Well, sunny place, Boston. Yeah.
Well, compared to Seattle. So when I worked with Microsoft, there was like a joke that July is recruit week, is a recruit month, because that's the only month that you're guaranteed to have some sunshine when you bring the recruits over.
It was even more specific. We had a hotel that we would send people to that was sort of right on the water, and they'd be like, wow, this is Seattle's beautiful. And then they would move over and realize
300 days of rain.
They can create like artificial lights to light up the rooms in that specific hotel and make it look brighter and nicer, right?
Yeah.
That's what I'd do. Yeah, that's cool.
The joke about Seattle, though, is that it has one upside. It's not Vancouver. Vancouver is always worse.
Harsh. But the air quality is great. I have to say, actually, in the Pacific Northwest, both cities, the moment you step outside, you take this deep breath, and it's marvelous.
It is beautiful. It's beautiful. Yeah, you have so much outdoors around there. Well, thanks for coming on the show. Maybe start with a little bit of an intro, and then we'll get right into the topic. Tell us what brought you to, identity, security, this world, and tell us. I'll say it again. Thanks. Yeah, you muted me. Okay, I'll go again. So Aaron, thank you so much for coming on the show. Maybe we do a quick intro. What brought you to the space, and what is your company Nametag doing?
Yeah, well, first, thank you for having me. I've gotten to know each of you individually, and you both are so incredibly charismatic that I wanted to spend time with you. So the fact that you're both together is just awesome. So I'm really excited for this conversation. I have a long, kind of interesting career path. Each of us have our own sort of journeys in life. Didi, you mentioned Microsoft. I was there for 14 years. I loved the company. I loved the mission. I started in Redmond in product management. I was sort of the first product manager for Office, this world of taking the individual apps to, we call them the system, but bringing it together. So we now think of as 365.
Yeah.
I loved it. I loved the people, but I didn't love Seattle, ironically. I started in Seattle. So the rest of my career at Microsoft was outside the US. I spent a lot of time building Microsoft in new markets across Africa, Southeast Asia, essentially in Eastern Europe. Eventually running the Windows franchise in Brazil at this crazy moment in their economic history when the middle class was rising, and turns out they wanted a car, and the next they wanted a PC. We helped make sure that PC had Windows, and then ultimately in China. And I spent 5.5 years living in China, 2 in Hong Kong, 3.5 in Beijing, building Microsoft's kind of modern cloud enterprise business in mainland China, which was a wild, super exciting journey. I left that. I wrote a book. I had been living in Beijing on these kind of bad air pollution weekends. So I just decided to start writing. When I was getting ready to leave Microsoft, they were very kind. And they said, hey, maybe you want to take a sabbatical and change your mind. I used a sabbatical to kind of launch the book, which was really fun. And then I met these new folks actually in financial services and private equity specifically. And they said, hey, did you ever think about working in financial services? And I said, no, look, I love tech. I love operating. They said, well, we just acquired this sort of tech company that was based in the UK, and it was AWS's kind of first and largest partner at the time in Europe. And so it seemed like an incredible opportunity to go build that. And we went into sort of GCP and Azure just as those platforms were getting larger, and sort of changed the narrative we were having with large enterprises. But it was interesting kind of working fully with private equity, and that business, had a great outcome, and we built something we were proud of. But when it came to kind of doing something next, I was living in London, and it was just before the start of the pandemic. And I said, I'm going to move from London. I'm going to move back to Seattle. Right now I have a partner who's based in Seattle. And she said, oh, let's be more, stop traveling. Let's kind of be in Seattle a little bit. So we went to Seattle and we were there maybe a couple weeks. And then the sort of pandemic started. And so it was this crazy world where it felt like everything, was sort of the world was falling apart as we all did in those early months. And most importantly, right, everything was going digital. And so as things were going digital, suddenly I had all these friends and family members who had their identity stolen. And I was like, what is going on? Like things are really falling apart. Like, all right, I'm going to be a good friend. I'm going to be a good son. We're going to figure this out. And so we started jumping on the phone and calling all these essentially customer support hotlines. And everyone we'd call would say, well, before I can help you, I need to ask you some security questions.
What's your date of birth and social security?
Your mother's maiden name. And by the way, there's like 15 different ways to spell Weintraub.
Turns out down to what's your favorite color or what street did you live in whatever year? And you're like, well, I'm not sure. I was in college. Where was I living? It's just nonsense. But it turns out the answers to those questions are obtainable. And so someone had called before us and answered those questions, pretended to be us, and took over the accounts. And so I sort of said, how is this possible in the modern era that we really just don't know sort of who the person is, let alone are they human and which human they are kind of behind a screen, behind a computer screen when you're on the phone. And so we set out with sort of this mission of how do we solve that? How do we change that interaction so you can create kind of more trust in these sort of virtual environments? And that became at least the foundation of what we do at Nametag.
Yes.
That's fascinating because if you think about it, that's kind of the move to real ID or some countries issuing you some real digital identities. I think
give you
in the
more
US
context.
It's harder, but this is a very interesting area.
To give you more context, Larry Friedman, who has been my
friend and partner from RSA
from my RSA days, we were there when RSA acquired a company called Varied that was running on top of the LexisNexis, and eventually we resold it to LexisNexis as RSA. And what it did was sit on the LexisNexis and created those secret questions. So way back when. And I'm talking about when dinosaurs roamed the earth around 2004, 2008. Secret questions was like the best thing ever.
Because there wasn't social media.
There wasn't social media. Also,
people couldn't find this information about what's your first car and what's the maiden name of your mom.
Yeah, but
your dog.
But the speed of which fraudsters were able to catch up to this was unbelievable. That's why RSA, I think, bought Varied in 2008 and divested from it even in 2011, selling it back to LexisNexis. And fraudsters have moved on, but the world has not. I think the idea of identity verification, of knowing, the old cartoon of even a dog can be anybody he wants on the internet, is still true. Now, I think that verifying who you're talking to, you just had a very cool video of verifying who of the deep fakes.
Come check my deep fake video on LinkedIn.
Yes. So there's...
Shameless plug.
But I think the identity verification space is really critical. Now, Aaron, one of the things that you and I were talking about when you and I were talking one-on-one is, where do you see identity verification plug in today in the corporate flow? Do we plug it in when we hire somebody to replace the I-9? By the way, right now an I-9 process is me trusting Lital to verify my I-9. So right now this is as trusted as the I-9 is.
Why me?
So for example, I hired Nitzan, and when we did I-9ing for him, all the I-9 requirement is that somebody else, an adult in your household, can attest that they've seen the government documents that you say that they are.
Okay.
Very trustworthy, right?
Of course. I mean, I'm Team U. So
exactly.
if you're fooling the system, I'm going to support you.
So the person that verified Nitzan was Gal, his wife. And when I signed up into Ort, the person that verified me was Yotam. And all I needed to do was do something like this over a Zoom call.
So that's basically the way for remote employees to verify and attest to who they are, is to get somebody that knows them to say, yeah, that's fine.
sort of, kind of.
That's what most corporates do. Aaron, what do you see mostly happening in that
It's
world?
wild. I think you're spot on, and there are a couple things to unpack here. I mean,
Okay.
first, it's sort of this concept of how identity verification is done. And traditionally, the place that you needed it was in financial services. And so let's say you're opening a new bank account and the bank has regulatory compliance requirements to go through what they call a know your customer or KYC process.
Yeah.
Right? Is this, anti-money laundering? Do we know the source of the funds? We know who's opening the bank account. The challenge has been that's always been a very sort of check the box regulatory requirement. And so over the years, there have been a lot of providers and technology. It started out manual, and there were companies that would, you'd literally take photos and somebody would look at it in some part of the world, to eventually automating it, be able to look at the photos and things you submit and sort of check the box that it's plausibly you. And so identity verification for many years has really been focused on that use case. The challenge is that that was optimized for sort of compatibility and make it super easy to open the bank account. Don't put in too much friction. On a practical level, that means they exist in web browsers. And so all of the tools that do this sort of KYC, check the box, exist in web browsers because say you're opening a bank account online, you want to continue in that browser environment, maybe the webcam opens, often there's an upload button, forget now that you could maybe go to GPT and say, here's my photo, make me a driver's license, save as PDF, and literally upload it, right? But that's the KYC process. And so what we found first is in order to take identity verification into any new scenarios, we had to actually reinvent it. And by reinventing it, we realized that we had to do something that what we first thought of as preventing digital manipulation. How do you prevent that? Well, I'm going to make a fake PDF of an ID document. And so now we would think of that as really deep fake prevention as the threat models have evolved. So we said, all right, let's take that same experience that an end user goes through. Let's say scan your ID and take a selfie, but let's recreate it exclusively on mobile platforms. Because if you do it in mobile, it turns out it's actually faster, it's a bit slicker, it's native, it feels good, great. But you get all this incredibly secure advantage from the native technologies on the mobile phone.
Why mobile is more secured?
Say again?
Why mobile is more secured than doing it in a browser in the legacy way?
There are a few layers you get. First, you get really we think of as cryptographic attestation. And what it means is that the mobile phones themselves operate in these trusted compute models on Android or secure enclaves. You would think of it as in iOS. And they're basically little encrypted bubbles, right, that are regulated by the walled gardens of Apple and Android. And so anything that exists in that allowed into the secure enclave, it has gone through the Apple's validation process or in the Apple Store. So that's kind of one piece. But then what you're able to get because you're operating in the secure enclave are we think of as attestation, which means that, for example, the camera that you're using to capture a feed, it lives within the secure enclave and is the camera that you're expecting it to be. So that means to use a deepfake, for example, there are two common ways you would use a deepfake. One is what's called an injection attack. An injection attack is the best way to understand it is like Zoom. If you're on Zoom or Teams and you literally select a different camera or microphone, right? Super easy. You can select a piece of software that is an emulator that's running, let's say, live deepfake emulation software. Same thing in a browser. It's very easy to inject, maliciously or not, change the video feed. You could in a mobile phone. It's very difficult if you're operating in that secure enclave world to inject. You have to essentially break the encryption of Apple and Android in order to inject into a flow. So then you get to the other way people use deepfakes, which are presentation attacks, which is often, let me hold up a photo or video of someone else, or, maybe it's a doctored photo or video even on your mobile phone, or maybe wear a mask, look kind of Mission Impossible style, look different. But real things. But again, on a mobile phone, the neat thing is you get to take advantage of all the modern technology, which includes, for example, the 3D depth map camera, the same thing that powers Face ID. You can use that camera, let's say, when you're capturing the selfie. And so you get all this advanced things. And frankly, we find new ones that we're constantly deploying, different layers, we think of it as protection, all from the mobile phone. And so you don't realize it. Our average thing is 23 seconds. You scan your ID and you take your selfie first time. But behind the scenes, we're able to make that such a secure experience that it opens up all these new possible use cases where you can traditionally identity verification wouldn't work for security. And then actually now you can bring it into secure use cases. That's been really the exciting technology breakthrough that's happened.
Yep. And one of the things that Chris Anderson and I have been talking about in terms of identity verification is risk-based authentication has been here for a very long time. Now it's really useful in a bank where you try to reduce friction, but there is a step up. You can always step up in a consumer-based environment. In an enterprise environment, you already start with the strongest authentication possible. So stepping up doesn't make sense. We think identity verification is the right way to step up. Basically put the user that we suspect in a quarantine environment and make them go through an app-based identity verification process.
So you're talking about cases when you suspect that a user is compromised or
Correct.
somebody is stealing his identity.
Yes.
You think of like using this type of technology
Exactly.
to inspect and attest for.
Exactly. Put the user in basically timeout. Like let them still Slack. Let them still basically do answer and read emails, but don't let them transact. Or don't let them send money anywhere. Financial services do this a lot. So, for example, if you have not updated our address, I think we're in the 6-month period since we moved. Most banks will send us an email saying you have to attest that you did your address change, and now you can't do certain transactions until you attest for that.
Yeah, or like if there is suspicious activity on your account, they'll freeze it. They'll tell you to call a number. And
exactly.
It's a similar approach.
Exactly. You should put basically the users in quarantine or timeout or some experience that they can still communicate, but until they verify, they can't do much more than that.
So, Aaron, I think your solution is coming in a time that corporates become so aware of the problem of identity, and they actually need to verify that the employees that they have are the employees, not just for that reason. I mean, there's been on the news, if you listen to Wall Street Journal podcast, The Journal had an episode, I think last week, about North Korean IT workers sitting in North Korea or maybe in a third country, but North Korean, they use fake American identities that they steal. They go on real Zoom calls. They get accepted to IT, AI dev jobs. They're really capable. They manage to go through all the tests and get the job. They have a bunch of schemes to go and, an address in the US that the device are being sent to and then forwarded to the person. So they will have the laptop that is issued. But in a world that, as Didi said, and as you said, now is completely remote or hybrid, people don't show up to work. Nobody has seen them. The need to highly skilled employees and hiring wherever you can find those employees. It seems like the hundreds, maybe even thousands of those kind of North Korean workers that are now working in corporate America in different IT roles. Some of them might not do anything malicious, even though a few were caught also, spying or putting some malware and other stuff. But some of them just take, a 6-figure salary and bring it back to the really needed North Korea regime that is taking the money and using it for its nuclear program. So this is only one example of scams, fraud, all kind of like, I don't know that my employee is actually who I think it is. Employees working for several companies. That's a trend that I think a lot of HRs in big corporates are facing. We don't know where else the person works. Them outsourcing work for other people. It's crazy world. Every day people find it. So how do you see this trend, affecting you? What type of those problems you can solve for organizations, and how you think about it in general?
It's a very important topic, and I'll say this is not hypothetical. It is incredibly relevant, and this is almost every company we work with is going through these sorts of issues. And I think, Didi, to your point, even on kind of step up or when you see suspicious behavior, or that's one amazing way people are using some of these new tools, like, more secure identity verification. But if we step back a second, thinking about the life cycle of an employee is really important.
Yes.
And especially in this world of, provisioning, MFA, it's great. So let's say that you have now, well, the average, the most common use case today that we see people happen is that, and it started, I think notoriety came to this MGM use case last August, right? So, and you've covered this, but sort of the MGM brought awareness to an issue that a lot of people were facing. And it was really kind of an old-fashioned technique. But, in the old world, we might have called it being a con artist, and now we would refer to it as social engineering. And basically what happened for listeners that might not be aware, a bad actor called the employee IT help desk at MGM and said, hi, I am an employee, happen to be an employee who has elevated permissions. I am an employee and I am locked out of my account. My authenticator isn't working. My MFA isn't working the right way. I need to sort of reset access to my account. And it was roughly an 8-minute call. They asked a few questions. And at the end of the day, the IT help desk rep did the best they could, but they reset access for that individual. The individual then went and deposited ransomware and sort of took down MGM for 2 weeks. And so the odd thing about this is that is not a wildly technologically sophisticated cyber attack. That is literally someone being good on the phone, right? A good talker, a kind of a con artist, good at answering questions to get these, hardworking poor help desk reps, right, to do something that they didn't otherwise want to do.
Yeah, they just trust the person.
It's more than that. Help desks are measured by problems they solve, not by problems they create.
That's
so every time they ask
to check the tickets
exactly
and
so
close it.
They're measured on how fast you solve the problem for the customer, not on how many problems you add. Now add this to somebody pretending to be a more senior person, the likelihood
with a sense of urgency.
With a sense of urgency.
Yeah.
What is the likelihood of somebody in a lower tier, basically? And I'll give you the first example. Most places will start by giving an employee ID. And half the people's employee IDs are everywhere online in millions of pictures of their badges. I won't pretend to be Chuck, but I can pretend to be, Tom very effectively. We have the same haircut. We also speak very, very fast. Nobody in help desk will ever know that I'm not an SVP or an EVP.
Yeah.
And they will panic. They will panic.
And it's lose-lose because, by the way, if you got into that job as a profession to be in help desk, you like helping people.
Yes.
You like getting to know. You're probably a people person. But every interaction does not start with how can I help you? It's an identity interrogation.
Yes.
Right? No, tell me this. I have questions for you. I have this. And if you ask too many, the person's upset and it's a bad call. You're going to get a bad score. You're right, Didi. It's going to take too long. Your metrics are going to be bad. It's literally a lose-lose scenario.
Yes.
But this is the primary framework that exists. And so because it became so easy and MGM made it so popular and some particular kind of bad actor groups got very good at this, it's gone like wildfire in the last 12 months. And so, there are 230 other companies attacked in Q4 alone last year. And then this year has just been all out. And new industries like healthcare in particular have really gotten targeted with warnings from almost every government agency around the world of healthcare is being targeted at the help desk. Please watch out. Please be careful. Because bad actors are just doing this over and over. And it has nothing to do with you. It's literally someone pretending to be you to take over access to your account. So as secure as MFA is, as secure as all these wonderful technological things we've invented have been, people are using a very human process to evade the technology.
Yeah.
And that's the concern. So let's focus there. Like that is the primary way. And then we'll start to unpack even more. But makes sense so far?
Yes.
Absolutely.
And it's thinking about it as like putting, the best security door in the front while leaving the back door open.
Totally.
It's exactly that, because let's say I invest in technology like Duo or Beyond that have done amazing things to do the continuous path, but they're not dealing with the point of reset because they don't own the point of reset.
Yeah, it's the toughest one.
Exactly.
Yep.
That's right. So I often say now, MFA is totally, it's critical, it's necessary, but it's not sufficient because there's this concern around recovery. So then you go to the other end of the spectrum and you're like, okay, what about onboarding or provisioning? How do you make sure that the person you're setting up in the first place is the right one, is the person you intend? And when I started at Microsoft a while ago, I had to go to a physical office and a security desk, and they checked my ID, and the security person asked me questions. They gave me a physical smart card. They set me up for my methods of accessing the network. Like that was day one. Think of that today. That doesn't exist,
Nope.
right? Day one is I'm a remote hire. Maybe I've interviewed on Zoom. Maybe my camera was broken. I didn't feel well that day. It's a common thing bad actors claim.
Yes.
Yep.
Right. So the
Yes.
camera's off. You hired them. You don't really know who you hire. Then to your point, I-9 verification in the US actually doesn't have to happen until day 5 often.
Yep.
So an employee is now
You
hired.
already have the machine, you have access to everything, then they do the I-9.
Totally.
Right?
And even by the
Yeah.
way, I-9 we talked about is not really meant to be for a secure process. So that's
Sure.
even just the checkpoint. So
Yeah.
so then HR has said, okay, we're going to hire this person. IT, typical thing. IT, here's a ticket. Go create an email account for this person, provision their account. And then they send back, or they send directly to the person, often their personal email address. Here's your temporary password. Here are your instructions to get configured for MFA. So this person we've never met, we don't know who they are, just got an invitation to join the network. Right. And then again, often they're not even, no one's even look at some kind of an ID until day 5 in the US. So day one, they're coming to work. And we've seen this unfortunately far too often. Day one, they come to work, they sign in, and they grab a bunch of IP and documents, and we never see them again.
Yep.
And the company's like, oh my gosh, what have we done? Or it gets worse. And that's where it's, no, I'm here for the long haul. Right. And they get through the I-9 process, maybe, or and the fraud scenarios go from there. Yes, you could be a North Korean that's sort of posing and working. Yes, you could have outsourced your job.
Yep.
We see a lot of this. I accepted the job, but I'm actually going to give it to someone in a lower cost labor market. We've heard so many stories where people say, oh, the person they outsourced to actually was doing a pretty good job, but we needed security clearance or some training thing that they didn't have. So, we couldn't even allow that if we wanted to.
It's okay for the company. They have a legit employee, and that's somebody else that does the real job.
That's right. So this is the whole life cycle. I mean, that's the crazy part, is that identity verification really needs to, I would argue, happen early in that life cycle. Maybe it's when you apply for a job. Maybe it's
first interview, HR interview, potentially,
or even signing the contract.
Exactly. Offer letter, or maybe you sign the offer letter. Okay, and so you're outside of a potentially biased hiring scenario. Okay, great. But now I want to go into, we're going to provision you, and is that HR's responsibility or IT's responsibility? We've seen IT taking charge of that and saying, hey, we're going to do this for you, HR, as well. I doing an ID check at the point of credential issuance is a great kind of side way to make HR feel more comfortable, but it's for a good reason that people accept.
Yep.
So you've got provisioning, then you've got obviously ongoing step ups. You're right. Hey, I want to provision something new. I'm seeing suspicious behavioral data. Let's still make sure it's you, for example, or, the security operations center sees things, all the way, of course, through to recovery and kind of beyond. This concept, though, of being able to verify and re-verify who the person is behind the screen, I think is critical to sort of surround or complement the incredible technology we have in things like MFA and passwordless.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah, totally. Very needed, and it's kind of like the least thought of part, and it's the like everything, it's your weakest link.
Yeah, and that goes back to our supply chain attacks from the previous episode. That when we think of supply chain attacks, the supply chain of employees is another form of supply chain. And that basically, the fact that we don't verify in key elements of the supply chain, of how we hire, how we make sure that things are escalated.
So,
but I will say that now my cynical part, Aaron, you missed that part. We were discussing about the pager bombing stuff in the previous.
That was totally on my mind as you were just talking. So yes.
But one of the things that made me really scared is now would people start targeting TPMs as something that is targeted for supply chain attacks. But that's if you have thoughts on this, happy to hear. If not, by the way, it's okay. It can always be paranoid. It can always be more paranoid.
I think there's right to be. And, if you think of that, it's obviously in the hardware and the manufacturing context. Let's say who has access to TPM, who's building the hardware that we think we're ordering. Super valid. But even, lighter weight, think of it in the software supply chain. Who's helping to contribute to our code bases? Who's helping?
Yes.
And that's sort of the North Korean scenario or otherwise. Like, so much of our work often is not physical stuff. It's that intellectual type of work that we don't know who those people are. Like we're at the basic level. You hire contractors, maybe if you're really a judicious, hiring manager, you say, well, send me the resumes, the people working on the team, the CVs. I want to review them. Great. You don't actually know that those are the people showing up for work.
Right.
You don't know those are the people that you've sort of hired in the end. I mean, there's so many elements of this that our digital supply chain of kind of information work is unfortunately vulnerable because we only know people by usernames, email accounts, aliases, and not necessarily a way to verify who they really are. And that to me is an enormous risk across our entire digital infrastructure and internet today.
Yep. I actually, Aaron gave me an interesting idea of maybe, Aaron, we need to go off and add this to the startup concept of right now. We were talking about the open source supply chain. I don't know who contributor something on GitHub is. I have no idea who that person is.
Would you want some sort of attestation to his identity?
Yes, it could be. It could even be an opaque attestation. It doesn't need to expose their identity, but they can say, you know what? We actually know that this person is who they claim they are. That they are, let's say, I can say, you know what? I need somebody to contribute to this critical cryptography part. They need to be a U.S. resident at least.
And somebody can attest to the code that it's coming from this device and from this location. And so that's not...
Exactly.
I think you're opening an option for a lot of companies that cannot do it today to verify identity of the third party contractors, freelancers. Like the beauty that you're not on specific device, and you know your technology is bound to mobile, which is everybody has it, no matter what place in the world. I think makes it very relevant, and without your technology, I think nobody knows what's this black box of third party. So I think you're very relevant, of course, for employees, but I would assume employees, maybe, yes, you can bring them over to your headquarters and still check them out. That's not the case with third party and freelancers and whatever your supply chain is. Would be good for companies to start thinking about it that way, right?
Yep.
I think you're spot on both. And I think, Didi, I think that's also a brilliant concept you're thinking about. And so we tried to do, we have created these sort of integrated solutions where we said, let's take our novel way of doing identity verification and link it to out-of-the-box things that people can use. Let's give a tool for help desk reps. The day one, if they get a call they don't know, they can just send a request and know who they're actually speaking with. Awesome. Let's create a way to surround, awesome MFA tools like Duo and Okta and hopefully one day beyond, right? And passwordless that, you can provision, who you're signing up, know who you're provisioning. And by the way, you have a self-service way to do recovery. So maybe the end user doesn't need to call the help desk after all. That we sort of made these solutions, but and they're working well and big companies are using them and the adoption's been incredible. But we took us a while to sort of figure out where to use it. And funny enough, Didi, I think you had an interesting refinement on an early area we tried, which is I was a firm believer that, the internet could not always be anonymous.
Yep.
It's great to have pseudonyms. It's great to have aliases, but that safe communities know their members.
Yes.
So I would argue that a platform has a responsibility to at least know who their users are, even if they let the user operate with a pseudonym or an alias.
Yeah.
So I thought social media would need this. I thought dating platforms, like how crazy is it? You sign up for a dating platform with like a Facebook login, and then hopefully you get to know someone really well and you're going to go meet up in person and you have no idea who you're really meeting.
Right.
Oftentimes my sister, I said, she's nervous. Would you mind sending me a copy of your ID before we meet? It's crazy. Like that, but where you're going, things like GitHub and others, that's a really clever way where actually a platform could verify their user, know authentically who's sort of doing the contribution, so that they don't need to put their real name necessarily on that open source contribution, but at least the platform knows.
Yes,
I love that.
That the platform is aware that and is able to basically know, because right now GitHub is the de facto source of knowledge. And second is one of the AI modules that's even more opaque. So I could claim that somebody will ever understand an NPM. Nobody will understand an LLM. The likelihood of somebody, you remember we were at a friend of ours works for Red Hat and is in charge of an AI part. He says, we wrote the code, but we actually don't understand exactly how this works. And this is some of the smartest people in the world working on some of the most sophisticated stuff. And they are limited. So how do we know that somebody who has trained an LLM actually has done this in a good way, in a way that we trust? So this opens up a whole bunch of stuff in terms of the control supply chain. Lital, you usually are the one that runs out of time. Are we good on time?
We're good on time. I think what's interesting is that we can be in a world that, you know, similar to the way you can have TSA pre or like clear, people can still have, if that's what they're interested, anonymity in the internet. And, you know, if you're consuming the code or you want to date with anonymous people, your problem. And then you can have another tier of identified, verified, maybe paid, maybe not paid. Just, you know, there is a level of trust for those that want it, that don't care about giving away the information and understand that for that, they get better service, they get something out of it. So I'm willing to give my information to Clear and TSA Pre because I get premium service, I get to speed up. I think there is a world that GitHub can still have unverified, completely unknown people contributing code, and people consuming this code will know, use at your own risk, while others can have this tier of verified, checked identity linked to it. You know who is the code owner, and so I think we should move to a place, and I think we had the episode about
real identity on the internet.
We talked about that. We want the internet to have, and I think there is a world that the internet will have both. I think there is still beauty of freedom of speech, not being identified, having this completely uncontrolled internet. On one hand, it has its purpose for, again, being able to say whatever you want without being canceled, whatever. And at the same time, have the benefit of verified, trustworthy, connected to a human being. And we need to move from the world that is the Wild West to that world and live in this. There is the Wild West, but there is also civilization, and I have both. So that's my opinion about the internet. The more I'm thinking about that, it's like you choose. You want to be TSA pre or no? Stand with the line, in the line.
I'm very aligned with you ideologically. I'll say though, there's a nuance that occurred to me on this a while ago, and it ended up being something we built into our product, which is this concept of not just verifying someone, but re-verifying someone.
Yep.
So let's say you want to be that platform that the profiles are truly verified. You're right. Sure. There's a room for anonymity. Let the market decide. You want to be totally anonymous? Go to one platform. You want to be verified. The challenge with verification, as it's traditionally been done, is that it's a one-time point.
One-off. Yeah.
Right. So the best analogy, and I don't mean to pick on Airbnb, but they're all like this, right? And Airbnb, wonderful company doing really innovative things in other places, but they tried initially to replicate, and they taught me this, they tried to replicate a hotel check-in experience. You go to a hotel typically, and you give them your credit card and you give them your ID every time. When you go to Airbnb, you have an opportunity to verify your profile and you get a check mark next to it. One time. So that for the rest of your Airbnb life, right? Doesn't matter if someone else is using your account's been compromised, you operate with that verified profile check.
Yeah.
And the difference is a hotel actually doesn't do that. When you go to the hotel, every time you check in, you ask for your ID and your credit card, and you do it again. And so that's this element of re-verification. And one of the challenges has been in the traditional way of doing identity verification, you would always have to scan your ID and take a selfie again. And so it wasn't really set up to be able to re-verify someone in an efficient way. By the way, most of those platforms take several minutes. So you're not going to ask someone to go through all of that. We have some of the credit card companies talking to us about this stuff now, where they're starting to think, hey, can I do identity verification for suspicious transactions? Oh, but I don't want my user to have to go through that whole flow again.
Mm-hmm.
So we were able to break through by going onto mobile, became the basis of actually something we patented that we announced any day now, actually, which is really neat. Around re-verification. And we call it this concept today of a selfie chain. And it's this idea that a person, you can look at a person's selfie, which by the way, we can capture in a really unique way with the 3D depth map camera and all this spatial intelligence. We can compare that selfie to earlier selfies and back to the government ID photo. So once you've gone through and used Nametag, let's say on one mobile device, the next time we can re-verify that person with just a selfie. And so it's incredibly high fidelity, it's high assurance, but it's way faster. And then we had to solve this other problem, by the way. What if you get a new device? That's how you get locked out of MFA in the first place. That became another thing we patented, this idea of solving for when someone gets a new device, where we simply say that time, hey, we don't know you, scan your ID and take a selfie this time. And then from here on out, We can leave an encryption key in the secure enclave and trust that device with still some skepticism, but the device is trusted to then get your selfie and then use the selfie to compare from a future state. And so the idea of being able to re-verify someone became a huge breakthrough, because it means that all these profiles where you want to have a verified profile check, or you've set up that employee the first time, you can help them again with just a single selfie. And to me, that totally changes the game of what's sort of the scenario, the possibilities can be.
Awesome.
That's super cool. Yes.
Cool. Awesome.
We'll play the game.
We'll play the game.
Let's do it. It's been a while.
It's been a while.
And now Lital and Didi present Prove You're Not a Robot. 3 final authenticating questions for our guest.
See, even we had the foresight when we invented the game that we put identity verification into that.
Yes.
So
because you're always
thinking ahead.
Exactly. Thinking ahead.
So, Aaron, when if you'd be a cybersecurity superhero, what would your name be, and who in Hollywood, this is the more important one, will play you?
Okay, so I had really interesting. So I would give my name to be, I would be Identity Defender.
Yeah.
And the reason is why is because I feel an enormous sense of responsibility to protect people's identities on the internet.
Yeah, with great power comes great responsibility.
It is incredible response. With exactly right. In fact, we have that line on one of our internal tooling. The second part, and this is so fascinating. Actually, last night I went to this new play in New York that was called McNeil, and it's starring Robert Downey Jr. So my actor, I would say in this case, is Robert Downey Jr., and I'll tell you why.
Good choice.
It was incredibly cool. It was a play about AI, and it was sort of this modern Shakespearean concept of like what's real and what's not, what seems to be. And he was played this character of sort of a famous writer who had written a lot of books, and then it came out with a new book. And sort of there was this question of like, was it really him? Was he using AI? How much of it was him? And then the whole story and the whole play unweaves around this concept of, what is a deep fake? What's real? What was really his work? If the AI agent trained off his previous work and help him co-write it, what does that mean? And so it's just such a fascinating topic of trust, of deep fakes, of Gen AI, all coming together. It really stuck with me. It was just last night. So Robert Downey Jr.
Awesome. Awesome. What was your first computer? And now that we know that you're a Microsoft X, tell us that it wasn't Windows.
Actually, I feel old. It was Commodore 64.
Nice.
I was very young, and my parents got some doctor advised them that if I got into computers, that maybe I would be I would learn more structure and discipline. And so it was a big expense at the time, but they got me this Commodore 64 to start to learn how to use a computer. That was my first.
Nice. I had the previous version. I have the VIC-20, which was that was the 20. I
think you're a little bit older than
Aaron. I'm older than Aaron, so I had the VIC-20, which was basically like a keyboard and a tape. You probably also had that tape thing with the Commodore 64 that...
I think we had some kind of disc. I don't exactly remember, but it's hard. Some kind of disc, it felt like at that time.
Okay, cool. And last but not least, what's your favorite waste of time on the internet?
I mean it in a nice way, but probably LinkedIn.
You're the only one enjoying this platform.
I don't know that it's an enjoyment, but that's a waste. I mean, certainly there are wonderful things that happen on LinkedIn, but it's becoming a lot of, I think as X has started to change its profile, more and more people are putting stuff on LinkedIn. It feels like contributions are up. And so that's probably the place I go. And then you like any social media platform, it becomes a little bit self-selecting because you follow people in identity and you follow people in security, and so then your whole feed becomes related to these things. And so it's borderline educational. Is it a good use of time? I'm not sure, but that's probably.
And you use it for business as well, because there's nothing like LinkedIn connections, right?
It feels like the procrastinating rationale, but yes,
that's
right.
No. So I have to say that as a CEO/CTO, you have to spend and build your thing on LinkedIn. Right now, we're still getting the most bang out of the buck, Matt and I, out of basically pinging people on LinkedIn.
Connecting on LinkedIn.
Pinging on LinkedIn. Like, for example, when Aaron and I got reconnected was because somebody in Cisco reached out to me and said, hey, we really want to start looking at Nametag. And I immediately pinged your sales guy that I met at the Glasswing event through LinkedIn. So I continuously nurture and use that. And when we were a startup, I used to ping people, like Matt and I had the nightly sessions, like between 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock, of going through the LinkedIn profile and say, yes, we need to contact this person. Yes, we need to contact this person. Yes, we need to contact that person.
I think you're right. It's a really sharp insight. And in a way, back in the old days when we were thinking about Bing, and Bing was getting going at Microsoft, and I was not very involved in Bing, for the record.
Yes.
But the technology thought process on Bing was often, how do you bring sort of a social graph of knowing people? And at the time, the discussion was Facebook really understood social graph such that it kind of came like your phone book. The universal phone book, if you want to find someone, kind of was Facebook for a while.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I would argue now that really is LinkedIn.
It is.
And so it's such a fascinating way that, the default way to find someone you're looking for and to get in touch with them in the professional context is LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And you're right, that's wildly valuable.
Yeah.
Yes.
Although, as I heard from multiple sales BDRs, I've been stalking you on LinkedIn. That has been something I heard multiple times. So it's a reverse world. It's a world where young people stalk old people like me on a platform. So cool.
I mean, you're the one they want to sell technology to. So
still, it's a reverse world. Anyways, Aaron, thank you so much for coming over.
It was a pleasure. I hope to bring you again in the future, because I think we couldn't cover all the topics. Like, I want to talk about the international aspect of what you're doing and your experience. So we make it up again in another episode. But in the meantime, thank you. I want to tell everyone to check Aaron's company, Nametag, and what they're doing. Really interesting. And if you're listening and you want to be on a podcast, please reach out to Didi or myself on LinkedIn and just a note, and we'll bring you in. The Didi and Lital Show is a weekly podcast. Please rate and review us wherever you get the podcast. Until next time, thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Didi.
Thank you. Thanks.
Have a wonderful week.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.